I'm sure that you'll get a few questions about your opening testimony, so I'm going to go to the gentleman from Georgia first, gentleman, Mr. Hice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate each of you being here, and thanks for holding this hearing. Drs. Lee and Prentice, I really appreciate the strong manner in which you declared that aborted fetal tissue in general, is not necessary when we have the alternatives before us for scientific research, and that no one will suffer for lack of vaccines and other issues similarly if the fetal tissue research is not taking place. So let me just kind of run on that, because obviously the 800-pound gorilla in the room is we know that aborted fetal tissue is being used. We do know that abortion providers, for an example, Planned Parenthood or whatever, performs an abortion, then they sell the body parts to a middleman company who then sells it to research institutions or whatever, and oftentimes, I'm afraid, federal grants are used in this process. Is that the general method as far as you understand?
Yes, that's exactly the method by which people obtain fetal tissue.
Okay. Now, so we know this process is still going on. Are you at all familiar with the type of claims that are made by abortion providers on the informed consent forms that they give out in terms of the type of research that is done with fetal tissues and the diseases that supposedly it helps?
Yes, Congressman. In fact, I have a copy of a consent form from one of those facilities, and if I might read it into the record, it says, research using the blood from pregnant women and tissue that has been aborted has been used to treat and find a cure for such diseases as diabetes, Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, cancer, and AIDS.
I didn't know we had a cure for any of those.
It's my understanding we don't,
okay.
Congressman.
Well, that would be my understanding as well, and yet, so is it fair to say that some of that information is at best misleading or inaccurate?
I'd say that's a fair statement. In fact, when this was presented to a group where I was at, where various ethicists and scientists were read that statement, all of them, to a person, said that particular statement would not have passed their institutional review board as being a fair and full consent.
So what do you think that tells us about the business of fetal tissue procurement?
My read of that, Congressman, would be that it's misleading, certainly, in terms of making people think that there have been great strides made with fetal tissue. And again, my contention would be that it has not been very successful medically, and that there are many other alternatives that are better science.
Okay, so let's get to a little more specifics that perhaps we don't want to say. When a mother agrees to donate an aborted baby, how does the abortion provider then harvest the fetal tissue and organs? Dr. Lee?
So the abortion provider the abortion provider will provide the actual fetus to a third-party vendor, such as ABR or Stem Cell Express, and then they will harvest the tissues and isolate the cells that they want, and then that's what they can sell.
Okay, and they do sell?
They do sell them.
Supposedly, these parts are not to be sold for valuable consideration. In other words, are not to be a profitable sale. And yet we all know that's not happening. In fact, a year ago this month, two companies in California had to pay almost $8 million for selling a baby liver, $350, the thymus, $500. We can go on and on and on with this. I think a lot of times, though, profit is made in the transporting of these body parts to try to get around the law. It seems like there's a real weakness in our law protecting the valuable consideration. Would you agree with me in that regard?
I believe that there are some serious concerns with how they are charging some of these fees.
Dr. Prentice, would you agree?
Yes, I'd agree.
Okay. Well, using the alternatives that you talk about, that both of you have mentioned that have been so successful to the extent that you believe that the fetal tissue is not even needed for scientific research, I'd like to get into, what's the cost comparison? Let's go this route. The cost comparison between the alternative use versus the fetal tissue use of research.
I can give you one example, just in regards to if you want to use humanized mice to test immune response. So the current, one of the most popular methods, as we know, is to obtain the fetal liver and the fetal tissue, and the fetal liver and the fetal thymus to generate these human mice from the fetus. But it's been shown in a recent manuscript that if you obtain neonatal thymus, that this is actually more efficient and more abundant. So that in the end is going to mean that it's going to cost less. So for example, the authors state that it's more abundant because more than 1,000 fragments can be obtained from one donor. This compares to fetal liver, which you can only obtain 20 fragments per aborted fetus. So that means that they can engraft 50 times more mice per donor with neonatal tissue versus fetal tissue. So just in that one example, it's going to be a cost.
Dr. Prentice, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Not at this time.
Okay. Listen, I appreciate there's a lot more directions we can go with all of this, but I appreciate the fact that you both stated emphatically that tax dollars do not need to go further towards the fetal tissue research, and I am deeply appreciating your commitment in that regard. It seems to me that there's a lot of talk these days about a wall being built. I think emphatically there should be a wall built between the taxpayer dollars and the use of those dollars going toward aborted baby parts and the research thereof. And I appreciate the fact that you are giving testimony to Congress in that regard as well. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The chair recognizes the ranking member, Mr. Krishnamurthy, for